that's a segment of the job that's very unpleasant, very difficult to do, very difficult to do. But you got to do it, and there's no training in the world that'll help you get better at it. And each one is a little bit different, and you're going to get different reactions. But so after that, and after they get through their grief, which might be a couple hours, it might be a couple of days, you need to go back and talk to them some more, because your family, if you got an unsolved case, that family is the nucleus of your victim's life.
Okay, can you introduce yourself for me, please?
Yeah, my name's Ramesh Nyberg, and I'm a native Miamian.
Ramesh, tell me, who was your last department that you worked for?
I worked for the Miami-Dade Police Department.
And what was your position there?
I retired. When I retired, I was in homicide. I was a homicide investigator.
Okay, for how long?
22 years.
22 years. Okay, before we start talking about your career, I want to talk about your book, Badge, Tie, and Gun, Life and Death Journeys of a Miami Detective. Can you tell the audience a little bit about what that book is about?
It's really about my life growing up in Miami and my police career. So there's stories of my growing up here kind of woven into the stories of my police career. There's a lot of kind of longer explorations into some of the more interesting cases I worked as a homicide investigator. But I talk about the uniform days also.
Okay. So I would probably consider homicide detectives as overachievers, and I think you were a way overachiever because you not only have that book, but you have two other fictional books in the pipeline, Sugartown and The Fly Boys. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, The Fly Boys is almost done. I'm working on my second edit, and Sugartown is one that I wrote about a year and a half ago that's going to get an overhaul. So I don't know when that's going to be ready.
Okay. How is that transition, right, from stuff that you experienced yourself to nonfiction?
I didn't find it that hard, but then again, my readers will judge that, right?
Yeah.
So I've always loved to write. I always liked to write as a kid. And I don't know whether it was because my dad was a big reader and I always saw him reading. I used to read a lot too, but I think I had some great teachers in elementary school that taught me a love of words and what the power of words.
Yeah.
And so I enjoyed writing. I wrote about stuff nobody asked me or told me to write. I just wrote about the stuff. So when I got into homicide, I knew I was going to be writing things in a journal, keeping a journal of things. And then when I retired, I decided, there's too much great information in here and great stories that need to be told.
Yeah. Okay, well, you also, as if that isn't enough, you also had another book that was more toward, I guess, for PIs, 10 must-haves to be a great detective.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that book? Why'd you write that book?
Yeah, that really started out as a how-to for private investigators, mostly because when I retired, I started my own private investigation agency.
Okay.
I knew a lot of lawyers, and I was getting a decent amount of work. And some of the non-law enforcement guys that I was hiring to do work for me were lacking in some of the skills that were second nature to homicide guys, right?
Yeah.
And there's very few of us around that are doing that kind of work. So I decided to start putting together a small training manual, how to do some skillful interviews, how to, what you need to do to bring along on a surveillance, those kind of things. And then it just turned into a book. I said, the heck with it, I'll just make it into a book.
Do you still have a investigative shop then?
I do. I still have my license.
Okay.
I've slowed down a lot in that area, and I don't really market it very much. So if there's the attorneys I know that'll call me, I'll go do some work for them if they need it.
Okay. What kind of cases did you work on, or do you still work on in that arena? Mostly
civil, mostly personal injury kind of stuff.
Okay.
Sometimes some insurance fraud and things like that.
Okay. I was just curious, did you ever, because I know people have a tough time dealing with this going to law enforcement. Did you ever work on any criminal cases for defense attorneys?
I did, one or two. So I'm very selective about that.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I mean, what's your take on that? Because I know some police officers like and agents go, I never work in those type of cases. But how did you kind of?
Well, one of them, so I'll get to that one was kind of an outlier, but a couple of them were murder cases in which that I was approached on these cases
Okay.
where my former colleagues or my former department, should I say, was the investigative unit, and I flat out said, I'm just not doing that.
Right.
I'm not going to go and testify against those guys.
Right.
And I did do a federal case that I reviewed before with the attorney before I took it. It was one that I thought was horribly botched. It was not a DEA case, and I really thought that the investigation was just very poorly done. It was real ramshackle, and I didn't feel like there was a lot of evidence there. So I felt fine about working on that case. It was not a violent crime; it was a blue collar kind of a crime, and so that's really the only other criminal case I worked. I was hired through an attorney, and it really was not a criminal case. It was a suicide that the family insisted was a murder, and it wasn't. It was a suicide.
Okay.
But that's something I was used to because in homicide, we had to work suicides and accidentals also. And in suicides, one of the things you learn very quickly is families have a very tough time accepting it.
Yeah. So audience, in the book here, there's a lot of, I think it's fair to say that you dealt with quite a few number of New York mob organized crime stuff down here.
Well, not a lot. I mean, the one I spent the most time with was in Boston, the Boston case,
Okay.
the Winter Hill Gang involving Whitey Bulger.
Okay.
But most of the organized crime stuff we had was all South American organized crime. It was Colombian cartels and drug related stuff. That was the majority of the organized crime stuff we did down here.
Okay. One thing I thought was really fascinating, I learned this after I was watching another interview with you, is you actually met Ribby from the Griselda Blanco fame.
Yeah, worked with him pretty extensively.
How was that? How was that working with the guy knowing that he had killed so many people?
Well, I've met a couple of hitmen during my career, and the common thread they both had was they were pretty nonchalant, easygoing type guys. If you met John Martirano, who was the hitman for the Winter Hill Gang, if you met him in a bar and had a beer with him, it'd just be like talking to a local guy that you never would suspect did what he did. Rivy was very matter of fact about what he did, probably in a little bit more of a braggartly way. He was probably a little more arrogant about it, but not overly so. When we talked to him, he just talked very matter of factly about it because he knew what legal situation he was in.
Yeah.
So there was no sense in trying to overly impress us or lie to us at that point.
Right. Okay, well, let's start from the beginning. Tell me a little bit about your family growing up. You're a native Floridian. So where'd you grow up? And tell me about your parents.
I grew up in South Miami, Florida, which is a small municipality, maybe 10 miles south of downtown. And my mom was a school teacher. She's from India. She grew up there, and she rose through the ranks of the school system, the public school system, and ended up being a principal. And she got her doctorate in music. She was a music teacher, and she got her doctorate from the University of Miami, and actually taught some things of piano and voice at the University of Miami. My dad was a boat builder. He was a carpenter. He was a sculptor. He was all the things that you don't need to wear a tie for, and that you don't need to be at work at 8 o'clock in the morning for.
Yeah.
He was his own kind of. He ran on his own schedule.
Ultimately, we're going to get to why you went into law enforcement. But when you got to law enforcement, how'd your parents take that?
Not well, and that's putting it mildly. They had envisioned other things for me. They were well aware that I'd been doing a lot of writing as a kid, and they, I guess they saw me on a pathway of being a writer at some point, and whether that was a journalist or who knows what. And they almost begged me, don't do this. We'll send you to journalism school. You're wasting your talent, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I said, look, Mom and Dad, and they had tears in their eyes. They were upset. And I said, this is what I want to do. This is calling me, and I want to do it, and I'm going to do it. Because at 20 years old, you know everything.
What was it though? Were they afraid for your safety, or were they just said, we want you to do doctor, lawyer, we think you have this much potential to do this, and they didn't think?
I think it was a little of both. I think they were afraid for my safety, and I think that they thought that being a police officer was not the higher station in life that they envisioned for me.
Okay.
And they said to me during that conversation that one day your writing will come back to you and it will surface. And they were right about that.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So what kind of kid were you? Were you athletic? Were you studious? What?
Oh, I thought I was both of those things. And I probably strive to be at some point, but I was a pretty good student when I put my mind to it.
Okay.
But I didn't put my mind to it often enough. And my grades were very average.
Your mom did not like that, being in education.
No, she wasn't. She was so busy too with her career and getting her doctorate and everything. And my dad was, my dad would come and talk to me about my grades when she said, go talk to him about his grades. I was a big football fan, still am. I was really kind of addicted to football when I was a teenager. And, I remember my dad coming in my room one day and said, there's not going to be any more football unless your grades come up. Well, my grades came up real quick. But and I played football in high school and I loved it. And I was torn between music and football. I loved both.
Mm-hmm.
I was brought up with music, and my mom was a classical musician. And so I got a very nice mixture of rock and roll and classical music and a lot of different genres of music. So I appreciate having that, and I enjoy it today. So, I guess I always had that kind of artistic streak in me, and it came out in my writing.
Yeah. So growing up, what did you want to do?
Well, at one point, I wanted to be a professional musician, and I think maybe earlier than that, I wanted to be a professional football player. And so neither one of those worked out. We spent a lot of time on the water. My dad, we sailed all the time, and so I never really got into boating as a profession or being a boat captain or anything like that. But I love the ocean, and I've always been interested in it. But yeah, I didn't know I was going to be a police officer till I was about 19 years old.
And how'd that come about?
I was a music major at Miami-Dade College, and a buddy of mine and I was a great bass player who went on to do great things with music. We were studying for a music theory exam in his apartment. And I hear this kind of crackling noise. And I said, what the heck is that sound? Those people talking. He goes, that's my police scanner. I listen to the police channel. So I go, show it to me. And he shows this. I said, how do you understand what they're saying? He goes, well, after a while, you understand the codes if you listen long enough. So I was kind of interested in that. And then as we're talking, red lights come flashing by his window, and we both look outside, and a Metro-Dade police officer has pulled somebody over across the street. And I could see the officer raising his microphone to talk on the radio to the dispatcher, and I could hear his voice coming through my friend's scanner at the same time. I was mesmerized by that. I thought, well, this is very cool. There was something about the brevity of the radio communication, which I'd done a little bit with my dad sailing, when we were crossing over to the Bahamas, talking on the radio. This is very cool. I want to understand more about this. And so I signed up for a couple of civilian observer rides where you can go ride with an officer. Ended up doing 4 of those. And after that, I switched my major to criminal justice. And I'm doing this now.
Wow, just kind of out of the blue. I don't think I've talked to anybody that was, I think I talked to another person that was maybe a theater major, but no music major yet. So that's pretty interesting.
Well, I don't know. It's I have a lot of interest. So my specialty is biting off more than I can chew, both as a kid and today. So something I try to get under control. But yeah, I switched and I felt a real calling at that point.
Do you what okay, so as you decided that this is law enforcement career for you, is it a shotgun approach? Is it a specific department that you want to join? How does that work for you at the time?
Yeah, I was 20 when I started applying, and at the time, the Miami-Dade Police Department had a hiring freeze. The big department, almost all the departments had a hiring freeze because of budgetary things going on during that time. And so I did, it was somewhat of a shotgun approach. I put in applications to about 6 or 7 departments, including South Miami, where I grew up, Opelika, and a couple of others. Opelika was the first one to call me back. And they said, you know, they brought me in for an interview. And they said, we'd like to hire you. Can you pay your way through the academy? And I had virtually no money. I was working in the security business. I was working at the Fontainebleau Hotel as a security officer. And I said, no, I don't have any money. And they said, all right, we'll pay your way. They tried. And so that's what started it. July of 1979, I entered the police academy.
So back in the day, so in Washington State, there's a police academy that everybody goes to. Chicago is a little bit different. New York is a little different. How does it work here? Or do you have to have a degree to get into the police academy? How does it work?
No, as a matter of fact, all you needed at that time was a high school diploma, and you needed to be a minimum of 19 years old, and you did not need a degree of any kind. And at that time there was one academy for all the police departments in Dade County. So there was a mixture. When I went in, my class, we started off with 36 recruits. It was a mixture of City Miami. Most of them were City Miami people. City Miami was hiring a lot at that time. The county, which was a bigger department, and we only had 5 guys from the county there. I was the only one from Opelika, a very small department. And then there was a smattering of other departments that were mixed in.
How long was your academy?
It was 5.5 months at the time.
Oh wow, so that's pretty decent.
Yeah, it's longer now. I think they're up to like 8 months now.
Okay.
Yeah.
As you're going through the academy, are you working or is it just the academy?
No, that's your work. You're getting paid while you're in the academy.
Okay.
A whopping $12,000 a year, might I add. And so yeah, that's it. You're there at 7 o'clock every morning, you know you're assembling out on this. At the time, they were using the basketball courts at Miami-Dade north of the campus, and we assembled out there in formation and uniform. You had a uniform inspection. God help you if you had lint on your uniform, or you know any brasso on your belt buckle or any of that kind of stuff. And you had these training advisors that came out and put you through your drills and whatnot.
Okay. Opelika?
Opelika.
Okay. I thought for sure I was going to mess that up. When you get to the department, how big is the department?
33.
33
33 sworn, yeah.
Okay. Are you in one-man patrol cars?
I was in a one-man patrol car. There were a couple times I rode with a partner.
Okay.
Not often, but most of the time one man.
Okay. When you start, how old are you?
21.
Okay, 21. First day on patrol. Are you scared?
No, I was excited.
Okay.
I was excited. I was anxious to get out on my own. I was looking forward to it. Well, the first day of the job, I was with a training officer.
Okay.
And then after about a month, not even a month, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks, they put you with a sergeant, and the sergeant kind of quizzes you on the geography of the town. Take me to this intersection. Take me over here. What's this place? And how do you get to here? And this is days way before GPS. So yeah. And Opelika, the streets were, most of them named streets, and they go all over the place. They're curved. Very difficult little place to learn, but you better know it.
Yeah. So, but again, after you're done with your I'm assuming FTO, your sergeant's done with you, first day.
On your own?
Yeah, you're just.
I was exciting.
Excited.
It was very exciting.
No,
yeah.
No trepidation at all.
No, I don't recall any trepidation. I think it gets mixed in with the excitement.
Okay.
And at the time, I was a typical rookie cop. I wanted the excitement. We wanted the danger. You wanted that kind of stuff. And Opelika had no shortage of it. You didn't have to go looking for anything. Especially on the afternoon shift, which is all I worked when I was there, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. You were going to go to calls that were going to challenge you. So it was a crazy place. It was a very high crime place. It was a very much an inner city environment.
Was there a typical call that you took back in the day?
No, I mean, I think in all police departments, the typical call is a disturbance, a domestic disturbance, or neighbor disputes, or mostly husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend type stuff. Those are the most common, right? Mm-hmm. But in Opelika, you had to be very aware of violence exploding at any moment. I remember going on a call of a stolen bike. It's the most benign sounding call you could go on. Stolen bike. The kid's bike gets stolen. The father's there. Next thing you know, the father's arguing with a neighbor, and then somebody's rushing out with a giant salad fork trying to stab the neighbor. And we got a full-blown riot on our hands. We got 20 people. People are throwing things at me from the second balcony. Some woman threw a damn blender at me, which has never happened before. Thankfully, that missed. And yeah, so things like that, it didn't take much to light the fuse over there.
Oh,
yeah.
So when you were growing up in Florida, I take it was a pretty safe area. What kind of changed for South Florida?
Well, everything changed right about the time I got into law enforcement, and so it wasn't planned that way at all. I mean, I didn't say, oh look, it's busy, I want to join the police department. I had no idea what the crime rate was like. I just wanted to go out and wear the badge.
Yeah.
I think most of us that got into law enforcement at that time did. That was exactly the same time that the cocaine trade was really ballooning, and where the Colombian cartels were really starting to upgrade their operations to the point where they just couldn't fill the orders fast enough, and so hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions of dollars, were coming into the country, mostly through Miami. Mm. Money and cocaine was coming into to Miami from all points. The cocaine was coming in from South America. The money was coming in from everywhere in the country. People were coming down to buy because that was where you could get it the cheapest.
When you first started as a police officer, was there ever a goal? Did you ever think, hey, I'm going to be on patrol the rest of my life? Or did you ever want to go to narcotics? Well, at least when you began, was there a goal?
Initially, I didn't really have a goal. Initially, I was too wrapped up in where I was at the moment, and I was enjoying patrol. Patrol can be a lot of fun. It's exciting, and then there's times when it's boring, but Opelika is an exception. And you had a good time working with the people that were on your squad, right? You got close to them. And so I was enjoying that. And then I didn't really know that I wanted to go to Homicide until a couple of years later.
Okay. You go from Opelika, you're only there for a year, and then you go to North Miami PD. Why?
Opelika has some corruption problems in City Hall.
Okay.
And when I got hired, we had a fantastic chief. His name was Reuben Greenberg. And he was a tremendous guy, one of the greatest guys I ever worked with and worked for. And he was putting together a very effective police department and a very effective detective bureau, too effective. And it was knocking on some doors in City Hall that they weren't real comfortable with it. Next thing we know, he's out. They bounced him out. He went to Charleston, South Carolina, turned that city around, became a legend really in law enforcement. But and they replaced him with a yes man who really just changed the environment, and it was a very uncomfortable environment. Like he was promoting people that were just friends of his. And in police work, promotions are supposed to be announced, and you're supposed to give people a chance to win the promotion. We came to work one day, and here's a guy that's wearing corporal stripes, and we didn't even have a corporal's position. We just created it overnight. Then this guy's made lieutenant, and nobody respected this guy. And I wanted out. So I looked for greener pastures. And the grass always looks greener on the other side, but this time it actually was.
When any of these departments, Opelika, North Miami, and later on when you get to Miami-Dade, I understand that there was quite a bit of corruption, at least, the cocaine cowboy days and everything else. Did you ever run across any of that?
You know, we did. I mean, I ran across, I won't name any names,
Yeah.
but, there was a guy I know that planted cocaine on somebody, and bragged about it. And, he eventually got caught. But as far as personally, like working with people that were outwardly corrupt that I was on the scene to witness, no. But we worked the Miami River cops, that was a big scandal that, ended up in 3 murder cases.
Can you talk a little bit about that for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't the lead on it, nor was I even on the squad that was the lead. I came in a little bit afterwards, but all of us did some work on it at some point or another. And that was a situation where several cops with the city of Miami, separate police department, were doing drug ripoffs, and they were pumping CIs for information about where cocaine was on the river, and a lot of the boats that were holding cocaine on the river, and they were going and ripping off the cocaine. And if there were people on the boats, they were shoving them in the water or doing whatever to them, and these 3 guys end up drowning after being forced in the water at gunpoint. And that's how our department got the case. Three bodies floating in the Miami River. They had no idea, what it was about till one of the survivors from that whole episode came forward and said, "Hey, here's what happened. These were city of Miami cops." Well, at that time, nobody believed them right away, because one of the things that was happening with the dopers was they were going to these security shops and buying badges and doing home invasions and saying, "Policia," and going in and ripping people off. So they thought, the investigators at first thought it was that. But as it turned out, this was probably the biggest scandal the city of Miami has ever had, was those guys.
And were those the guys, I was listening to another interview with you, were those the guys, and I don't know how this information got back, but they said, what happens if the cops roll up? They were going to basically shoot you guys.
That's one of the many things that came out in the investigation was, one of the guys that was debriefed said, it was one guy said, "Shoot, if the county shows up, shoot." Wow. Which is just incredible to me.
Now, through all 3 departments, but I know that later on this changed, but when you first began, you guys were carrying essentially 6 shooters, 6 shots.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Did you ever feel completely outgunned by these cocaine guys?
Well, initially in uniform, I never really felt like that until we started to see semi-autos show up a lot. And by that time, I had pretty much left and gone to Homicide, and I don't think our department started to go to semi-autos till about 85 or 86. And then, 86 was when the FBI shootout happened, and that opened up everybody's eyes to, in law enforcement about what we should be carrying.
Right.
So, I never really felt outgunned. I mean, I remember going to a couple of calls, where, barricaded subject, he's got a rifle, he's got a, Ruger mini, what is that? What was that thing? Ruger Mini 15, what was that called? I forgot the name of it now. But, semi-automatic rifle. And you start thinking, geez, I want to make sure there's some good cover when I get there. But that's why I always carried a shotgun too. I always felt like I was a little bit better prepared if I had my shotgun with me. And, we weren't required to carry them. But when I learned how to shoot one in the academy, we became fast friends, me and the Remington 870, so I always carried it with me.
Was there any difference between working at Opelika, North Miami, and Miami-Dade? Were you kind of doing the same thing, or?
It's really the same work. It's exactly the same work. There were some very slight administrative differences in the way the departments did things, but pretty much you could hop back and forth into any one of those uniforms, and it's the same job.
So you worked at North Miami PD for 2 years. Why did you end up going to Miami-Dade then?
Yeah, well, during my time in North Miami is when the light bulb came on about Homicide. And the way that happened was I was on a homicide scene. I was dispatched as the uniform officer to have the signal on a homicide outside of a grocery store. And this older gentleman had been walking out after buying groceries. He was accosted by three robbers who shot and killed him. And he didn't even put up a fight. I mean, it was just a horrible case. And so, I've roped off the scene. The body's laying there under a blanket. I'm separating the witnesses. Homicide gets there in their ties, county homicide. They talk to me. I give them a copy of my report. And I start talking to the homicide guys and he's telling me what they're doing. And I'm watching them work, and I'm thinking, I'm gonna leave here and go to another call and another call after that and go home. These guys might be working all night on this case and maybe well into tomorrow. And it kind of dawned on me, that's the biggest challenge there is in this profession, is working the murder of another human being. And then I realized that's what I want to do. Right there, standing there, that's when I was like, I want to work homicide.
How old?
Well, at that point, I'm 24,
Okay, so 24.
23, 24.
All right.
And North Miami did not have homicide detectives. We have a detective bureau that handled burglaries and handled a lot of other things, aggravated assault cases and whatnot, but they weren't trained in homicide detective work. So I had to make another agency move, and I wanted to go to the county. And the county was, 3,200 strong at that time. I think we're up to about 3,500 now, sworn officers. So I went from a 90-man department to one that's got over 3,000. But I knew that I would have an opportunity to work homicide there that I didn't have in the smaller departments.
Two more questions about patrol. Were there cases or were there calls that you didn't like answering on patrol?
As a young officer, yeah, I never really liked doing traffic accidents.
Okay.
I just, they're necessary.
Mm-hmm.
But, when you're young and you're new and you're working in Opelika and, you hear your squad members are getting dispatched on shootings and robberies, and man, that's where I want to be. Didn't want to be doing a boring old accident report.
Right.
But, they were necessary. Other than that, I didn't mind going to anything.
How about this? On patrol, did you ever see bodies prior to going to homicide?
Oh, yeah.
Did you see a lot?
Yeah, I think for a small department, yeah, I did see quite a few.
Okay. What was that first like? Is it a shock seeing your first body, or what is that?
It was fascination, I think, probably.
Okay.
And then, it was a suicide, and this guy's, I think what captured me about it was the stillness that, it takes a couple of bodies to get used to that. We're so used to seeing people, and we take it for granted, the chest moving and, the breathing process, which is just, something just that's automatic. There's this stillness about a body that's deceased that just kind of is fascinating. Maybe that's why people are so fascinated about murder.
Yeah.
That might be part of it. But and then my second body was in Opelika also. That guy was dying. He died right in front of me. He had been shot by his girlfriend. She was barricaded on the upstairs, and he was laying on the stairs and going the death rattle that I'd heard about was happening right there and then. And I was focused on her because she had a gun, and I wanted to make sure that she wasn't going to use it on me.
Yeah.
She was terrified. She had barricaded herself with a cabinet she had pushed. He had been beating her up, and it was a self-defense case. That case I remember vividly because of that.
Okay.
By the time I got her down the stairs and secured the weapon, he had stopped rattling.
Okay. How long? So you're at Miami-Dade. You don't go to any other specialty units. You go from basically patrol to homicide. How long are you on patrol before you go to homicide?
Yeah, well, I was 3 years in patrol. Now I did work a specialized unit for about a year and a half.
And what was that?
It didn't even have a name. It was created by one of the guys there that noticed that there was a lot of crimes, burglaries, and auto thefts happening on the midnight shift in certain areas. And he went to the lieutenant and said, "We need a group of guys to work this, like undercover surveillance stuff." And he recruited me. I said, "Sure, I'll do it." And it was a lot of fun. We got up on rooftops and we caught people doing all kinds of stuff. We broke up a whole auto theft ring. We caught a bunch of burglars, and we had a lot of fun doing that. But then I went back into uniform, and I got certified as an FTO, which is a field training officer, and I trained rookies coming out of the academy. By that time, I had put in for Homicide, I had interviewed for Homicide, and I was just waiting for an opening.
But that's essentially what, 5 years?
3 years from the time I got to the county,
Okay,
but
so,
including my other uniform time, yeah, 5 years.
yeah, but 3 years at Miami. So what I find interesting is talk to other homicide detectives. They wait for 15 years, 20 years to get to that pinnacle.
Mhm.
What was it about Miami-Dade that, I mean, were they just so busy they had so many homicides, or that was just normal progression there?
A little bit of both. I think Miami-Dade at that time, the homicide rate really went through the roof in 1980. 80 and 81, we had the highest homicide rate in the country. And so the homicide rate, was so bad that the detectives there were undermanned. And so like any unit, you would have guys that would retire. You would have guys that would get promoted and go out, because in our department, when you got promoted, you didn't stay in that unit. You went back to uniform.
Mm.
Uniform was the training ground for everything. So if somebody in homicide got promoted to sergeant, they're waving goodbye to homicide, and they would have to work their way back as a sergeant, right? So they would go back to uniform. So, but I also think that the department in general was one that you could go. There were so many specialized units that you could spend 2 years in uniform. I did 5, but you could spend 2 years in uniform, and as long as you had a good record, we're doing a good job. You could go work narcotics, you could go work robbery, you could go work auto theft, that type of stuff.
How does it work with the homicide detectives? I mean, do you have any training prior to go? Well, after you get selected,
Mm-hmm.
do you have any training that you go to?
Yes, they sent me to a couple of different schools. I went to a homicide investigation school. I went to two interview schools, seminars that were excellent. And then they put you with a mentor, a senior detective, to kind of, take you under their wing and make sure that you understand the job and are doing it well before you can start handling your own stuff.
How long does that last?
Anywhere from 4 to 6 months.
Okay,
Yeah.
so not too terribly long.
No, and you get a baptism of fire. In Miami-Dade, we were so busy that you didn't have to sit around and twiddle your thumbs waiting for a case. That you were going to get a case quickly.
Yeah. What was your first homicide?
First homicide. As the lead investigator,
Yeah.
it was a domestic. They don't give you a whodunit. We used to call them whodunits. They don't give you an unsolved right away. They give you a closed by arrest, a CBA case, where the subject's on the scene, uniform has him in custody. So in this particular case, it was a guy was having a big brawl with his wife. His wife had gone out for the night, and he was drinking, and he was suspecting her of being unfaithful. And he was drinking and getting pissed off. And of course, this was before the days of cell phones, so he couldn't text her and say, "Where are you when you're coming home?" He was just stewing and getting more and more drunk and angry. And when she got home, they were going at it. He, during this whole thing, he grabbed a .25 auto from the closet and shot her and killed her. He missed the first time and hit the waterbed. And so we worked that scene in about 6 inches of water. He had never been in trouble his entire life. And this is kind of typical of domestic related homicides, where these people aren't really criminals. They're just people that are just really bad at handling crises. to put it mildly, right? Then, and you add some drugs or some alcohol to the problem. They're overwhelmed by their emotions, and they do something ridiculously stupid and violent. It happens over and over again. It's happening today somewhere in the United States. Somebody's doing that.
You've probably handled hundreds of homicides in your career. Can you and maybe you can, maybe you can't, but can you break down what you think the difference between crime of passion, opportunity, and just flat out people evil wanting to kill another person? What do you think the breakdown is there?
Well, I'll start with the crime of opportunity, because I don't think with homicide cases, save for serial killers, there are no crimes of opportunity. Then people don't just go, well, that guy's alone, I'm going to go kill him. There are really no random homicides. If anybody ever says it was just a random killing, there's usually no such thing. If a serial killer is out hunting people, they're hunting people.
Mm-hmm.
That's not random. That's very specific. And thankfully, they're a very, very small percentage of that pie that you were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the larger section would be domestic related, like the situation I was just telling you about. Street level drug stuff, rip-offs. You rip me off, you're going to die. Stupid arguments between people over money, revenge. I think romance really takes up a big portion of percentage of homicides.
Okay. There's obviously some sensationalism that goes on, that you hear about a guy going, I just wanted to kill him because I wanted to know what it felt like. How often did that happen?
I never had one of those.
Never even had that.
And there's a serial killer who during one of his confessions, he was from Texas. I'm trying to remember his name now. You may remember. He said, I killed one man because I wanted to see what it felt like. And then after that, the rest of them were easy. I think those people are just so few and far between. Hollywood would like us to believe that, there's serial killers roaming around everywhere. They're not.
Yeah.
It's a very rare thing. When a child, for example, dies, about 98% of the time, sadly, it's going to be a family member. It's going to be a parent or a step-parent or a boyfriend or something like that.
You might have just answered this, but in terms of, we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, which is, as police officers and law enforcement, you see things that the normal public doesn't see. I think you as a homicide detective go even farther than that and see things that even most law enforcement people don't see. Can you break down, are there truly just evil people out there that are just looking to kill people from a homicide detective?
Again, serial killers, yes.
Okay.
But beyond that, there are evil people, I think, that like to commit crimes and brutalize people. I don't know that they always set out to kill. And an armed robber would be an example that, they're so desperate for drug money or whatever it is that, they're anxious or they're nervous or they're jumpy or they just feel so threatened that they want to kill this person so that they're not a witness against them.
Yeah.
I guess that could be evil.
Okay.
And I think the more accurate way to say it is that there's people that do really evil things that might not do those things under different circumstances. Example, we had a case once where this woman comes back home, typical housewife, nice suburban neighborhood. She comes home from Publix, which is our big grocery store down here, bag of groceries in her hands, and there's a burglar in the house. And the burglar didn't expect her to come in, but he's surprised. He grabs a knife and stabs her to death. And you're on the scene and you're going, you're looking at this woman who, that's my wife, that's my sister, that's my mom. That's an innocent person getting killed by someone who, is that person evil? Well, they did something terribly evil, for sure. Would they ever do it again? Probably not. Had the circumstances been different? Maybe not. Does she come in through the garage and there's no weapons of opportunity there for him? Maybe he doesn't do it there. Maybe he knocks her down and runs away. I don't know. I think that a lot of people have an evil streak in them, and thankfully it's not awakened that often. But when it does, that's where you get murders happen.
This, you mentioned dealing with hitmen before. What's their mentality? I mean, some of these hitmen have killed a bunch of people. Is it just kind of a matter of fact for them, or what's their psyche?
Well, I think most of them are first motivated financially,
Mm-hmm.
and then of course once they do one, what's the difference in doing two? If I get caught, I'm going to jail for the rest of my life, whether it's 1 or 30. And I think that talking to the two hitmen that I've talked to at length, John Martirano being one, George Ayala Rivi was the other. They do it because they're in an organization where they're expected to do it. They get good at it. Rivi was very good at what he did. So was John Martirano. And they get good at killing. I think there's a pride thing there too. This is my job. This is how I serve my boss, or this is how I keep my organization intact. I'm important. It's a matter of importance to them. And I might be way off there.
Yeah.
That might be, I might be playing psychologist there, but that's what I read into it.
Yeah. So in terms of a serial killer, I don't get the impression that they have much remorse. Do you think that Rivi do you think they have remorse, the hitmen?
No, because I think that they found a way to justify what they did. Now, John Martirano surprised us one day. He had already done his plea. He was taking us out on location. We were the U.S. Marshals. We were in a Suburban that had doors like this thick. I'd never closed the door with both hands before, but that's what the U.S. Marshals were driving us around in. And he was taking us out to different locations, and we were talking about the murder of John Callahan, who he knew very well. And he knew also at some point he had been told to kill Callahan. And so we're driving around and he's talking about all these places and things, and we did this, here's where we went. And suddenly he looks down at the floor and somebody asked him something and he didn't respond. And one of the marshals said, "What's the matter, John?" He goes, "I liked Callahan."
So maybe a little bit of remorse?
I think he did, but the day that he killed Callahan, he put 2 in the back of Callahan's head.
Yeah.
And Callahan had no idea it was coming. So it doesn't get much colder than that.
Yeah.
But I guess it was remorseful because that was a friend. The other ones were not.
Yeah. Did you have a specialty? Were you good at something as a homicide detective? Were you good at interviews? Were you good at collecting evidence, looking for, what were you, if you had one?
I would like to think I was good at talking to witnesses and suspects. I'd like to think that I was pretty good at getting confessions. There were guys in there that I worked with that were better than me at that. I learned from them. We had a couple of guys that were just superb at that, and luckily one of them was my partner for a long time, and I learned a ton from him. Getting confessions or getting even witnesses to tell the truth, which sometimes is just as arduous a task as it is from a suspect, right? That's the artistic element of investigations. The rest of investigations involves forensics and involves the proper handling of evidence and following up your leads and everything. But talking to people is the art form, and I'd like to think I was good at that. I'd like to think I was a pretty good listener, which is really important. Mm-hmm. The old Hollywood scenario of pounding on the table and shining a light in somebody's eye and, "Damn it, tell me the truth." It doesn't really work. It doesn't work. If you've got, especially if you've got a hardcore criminal, you got somebody that's been in prison before, you do that and they're just going to laugh at you.
Do you think there's any attribute that makes a good homicide detective?
Yeah, there's a couple, and I think number one is persistence. You don't have to be a genius to be a good detective. You don't have to be book smart. You don't have to have a college education. You just need to be a hound dog, and you need to just grab on and not let go. You need to be willing to do things over and over again, but just because you failed the first time and people didn't tell you the truth, or you did an area canvas and, not everybody came forward with anything great, do the area canvas over again. If you haven't solved your case, go back. Make sure you've talked to everybody in that neighborhood. We never said, oh, well, nobody was home there. No, you go back. You don't come back and report to the lead that, oh, then nobody was home. What are you talking about? Don't come back to me until you've talked to somebody there. So the persistence aspect, I think, is the most important thing. The best detectives I worked with are guys that just, man, they hit the ground running and they never gave up, and they learned how to organize their time too. That's pretty important.
How about when you started working these cases? It almost seems like, especially when you're dealing with victims' families, you get really close with them. Can you talk about that a little bit?
That's a relationship that few people understand, and it's hardly ever depicted in drama and media drama, Hollywood, and that sort of thing. You really don't see that. It's a very unique relationship. To begin with, we're the ones who knock on the door and give them the bad news. So that's a segment of the job that's very unpleasant, very difficult to do, very difficult to do. But you got to do it, and there's no training in the world that'll help you get better at it. And each one is a little bit different, and you're going to get different reactions. But so after that, and after they get through their grief, which might be a couple hours, it might be a couple of days, you need to go back and talk to them some more, because your family, if you got an unsolved case, that family is the nucleus of your victim's life. They're going to be the hub of data and information, and helping you understand the relationships that the victim had. And that's what's going to end up being the key, is what relationships did the victim have and with whom. Who were the exes? Who were the ex-business partners? Who were the people they depended on or trusted or didn't trust? Who had it out for them? Did they have issues with anybody? Those are the kind of things where you need to talk to people in the know. And so the family is usually that person or that group of people. And as the case progresses, you're going to hear from them. If you haven't solved the case in 2 or 3 days, a week, they're going to be calling you up. And the one person that stands out in my mind, in my life, is a woman named Frances Wilcox. And her husband was murdered in the office trailer of the business he worked at. He worked at a heavy equipment company, and he was the vice president and part owner of the company. And single gunshot wound to the back of the head, small caliber, no witnesses, and to this day unsolved, by the way. Although I think I know who did it. But she was a very sweet woman, in her late 50s at the time, and she called every day for the first couple of weeks. What's going on? What have you found? Have you found any suspects? What are the chances to start getting this thing solved? And so I talked to her as candidly as I could. And as time wore on, she called less and less, 1 week, and then every 2 weeks, and then every month. And we would talk a little bit less about the case and a little bit more about our families. My son was born right about that time. So she asked me, how's your son doing, and all this. And we became friends over the years. The murder happened on May 1st, 1986. And for 32 years, she called me on every May 1st, every single May 1st. And she would call after a few years, she'd call up and she'd say, you knew I was calling. Yeah. And we would talk, and we exchanged Christmas cards. I mean, she was a very, very sweet lady. And then a couple of years ago, I didn't get a call on May 1st. And I got a hold of her daughter through Facebook and found out that Frances had passed away. So it was, I felt bad, because that was a case I would love to have closed. Yeah. For her.
Yeah. It seems like you had established a really strong relationship with her friends even.
Yeah.
When you deal with something like that, and it takes a while, or maybe you never solve a homicide, does that take a toll on you?
Yeah, I mean, I think every homicide detective retires with cases that were unsolved.
Yeah.
And they probably have one or maybe more than one that kind of sticks in their side. And, God, I wish I could have gotten that one over the hump. And that's mine. That one, the Wilcox case is that one for me. Um, and because part of the reason is I'm pretty sure who was behind it. I could just never prove it.
How about in Florida, in your area that you worked with? I watch other crime shows from like Los Angeles and maybe New York and stuff like that. How's the cooperation from the public when you go knocking on a door as a homicide detective? Are people slamming the doors in your face, or it's pretty good down here?
We would get pretty decent cooperation most of the time. I think in uniform it's a little different. I think when you show up at someone's door wearing a tie in business clothes, it kind of softens the encounter a little bit and hopefully puts them at a little bit better ease. Especially if they know that, okay, there was a murder in the neighborhood. So, okay, here are the detectives. And some of them will crack the door open this much. Some of them will invite you in for coffee. So it really depends on the people. You were always trying to get that person who was, a chatterbox and who knew everybody in the neighborhood. You wanted that kind of person, right?
Yeah.
You wanted to learn more about what was happening in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And most of the time there was somebody that knew, some elderly widow or somebody that, made it her business to know what cars belong in the driveways and all that. You wanted to talk to her. And the old dragnet, Sergeant Joe Friday, Just the Facts, Ma'am. That was a great show, but I'm sorry, Joe, you were wrong. You don't shut people up when they want to talk.
Yeah.
Let them talk.
Were there cases that you didn't like to work? Types of cases?
Any cases involving children were
Yeah.
difficult. All children are innocent victims, and those were hard to work. Those were difficult to work. I mean, every case you worked, an innocent victim was difficult. But I mean, while you're doing it, you're involved in it, and then later when you go home, you think about it, and years later you think about it.
In '86, you're working, and there's a FBI shootout down here. And I just want to talk with you a little bit about it because I remember being at the DEA Academy, and this was something that we watched, and it was fascinating to me. Can you talk a little bit about that case because you were on scene?
Right, all of us were on the scene.
Yeah.
And it was a huge scene. It was one of the most one of the busiest scenes I've ever been on. Luckily, it was roped off pretty well. I've never seen on an outdoor scene seen that much blood and that much ballistics evidence just laying everywhere, empty shells from multiple caliber weapons all over the place. By the time I got there, Jerry Dove and Ben Grogan, may they rest in peace, had been taken away from the scene. So all we had left were the two subjects, the two bank robbers that were also dead. So my job was to report. Everybody's job there was to report to the sergeant who was kind of in charge of the squad that was dealing with everything. And when I say chaotic, I mean this scene is in a roadway or on the side of a roadway, and the entire road was blocked off. I know the area very well. I grew up very close to that neighborhood and rode my bike through there as a kid. There was an army of news media there. And I mean, there were people that had flown in from other countries in a matter of hours to cover this story. And right across the street was a parking garage, 2-story parking garage. And I remember looking up and seeing just a line of cameras just hanging over the ledge of that parking garage. It was incredible. I've never seen that much news media on a case before, with the exception of the ValueJet plane crash in 1996. But it was just crazy, and it was extremely sad because anytime you're working a case where a law enforcement officer is killed, the it hurts. It hurts. And I've been on several of those, and you think, that could be me. It's very personal.
Yeah, so it's two FBI agents get killed. I think 5 are injured, and then the 2 suspects are dead. It reminded me a little bit of the North Hollywood shootout, but can you talk about what had been going on prior to this whole shootout going on with the bad guys?
Yeah, those guys, Platt and Maddox, were very active bank robbers. They were they'd hit several banks. I think they hit a Brinks armored car as well, all down in the South End. They lived out in Kendall, which is in the South End. Our squad really got involved in this early on. We had a homicide out on a rock pit way out on the edge of the Everglades. And it was an area off of Chrome Avenue where a lot of people like to go just target shooting. They would take their 22s and whatnot and shoot at cans and things like that. And this guy was doing this. Guy was Ariel Rios, I believe his name was. He was found dead out there. Somebody had shot him, and his car was gone. And I think it was a black Monte Carlo. I remember it was a Monte Carlo. And little did we know anything. We didn't know anything about Platt and Maddox at that time, but that ended up being Platt and Maddox killed him and stole his car. They went out there expressly to steal a car, and they figured that what better place to shoot somebody in the open but a place where people go plinking with their small caliber weapons, right? And so you asked me about evil. Now, those guys were definitely evil. Those guys had detached themselves from humanity.
Well, it's weird. It's weird that why didn't they just steal the car as
Sure.
opposed to kill people?
Yeah. Well, it's a witness.
Yeah.
They eliminated a witness. I think that's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah. For those watching that are either want to go into law enforcement or are in law enforcement, I think that case in particular, I remember it really sticking with me because Morales is the one who ends up, I think, killing the last guy, and he does it with one hand with a shotgun, and it just, you got to keep your training up with firearms.
Edmund Morales did an amazing job. He was badly wounded himself. I think his right arm was shattered. He racked the shotgun using his leg and fired into the car and ended up killing both Platt and Maddox in that car as they were attempting to flee the scene. And to be able to keep your composure and your wit, your will and your physical composure as well, and be able to do that he's a real hero.
Yeah.
And he wrote a great book about it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your relationship over the years with the media? Like you have this case in particular, FBI, you have this whole thing, you have all the media looking at you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you view those as a hindrance? Can they be a help? I mean, how did you deal with them?
I think they were both at times because they could be very aggressive. And back in the 80s, I don't know how it's done now, but back then they would call the homicide office and say, "Hey, it's so-and-so from the Miami Herald or the Miami News. What have you got going on? I heard that you got a shooting up in the North End or whatever, and tell me about that." So we knew them. We got to know them by name. I became friends with a guy named John O'Neill, who was an outstanding reporter with the Miami News and later the Miami Herald. And John was the only guy who said, "Listen, I want to find out about what's going on with your investigation. And if you can tell me, I promise you that I'll call you up and read my draft to you before I send it to my editor. And you can tell me what you want excluded." No other reporter did that. Mm-hmm. And he kept his word. So we all liked talking to John because he was a trustworthy guy.
Yeah.
And so, he did a couple of my cases, and as I said, we became very, very good friends, still are to this day.
Did you ever have an issue where like the media burned you guys at all?
If the media burned us, and look, they were looking to burn us. They were looking for headlines.
Yeah.
In great quotes.
Yeah.
And there was a very famous Miami Herald reporter named Edna Buchanan. Everybody knew Edna, and she won a Pulitzer Prize for her reporting. And from a reporting standpoint, She was a great reporter. She didn't mind getting in anybody's face. She didn't mind knocking on the door of a family member that had just been told that their husband was killed. She would wait till we left and then go knocking on the door. Hey, I'm from the Herald. How do you feel? How do you do that? You know?
Yeah.
And you know, we all despised that because we had this relationship that I explained before.
Yeah.
And I think most victims' families did not appreciate that, but they would say something.
Yeah.
In their grief and their anger, they would say something. And she would use that as a headline or to fill out her her article. And I got to know Edna over the years, and she wasn't a bad person. She just she conducted herself in a heartless way because she felt she had a job to do, and that's the way she wanted to do her job.
Mm-hmm. So over the course of your career, I'm sure you've seen crazy things. Can you tell me about, I don't want to say the craziest, right? But tell me about a strange case that you worked on, strange homicide.
Well, this would take a while, and there's a whole chapter of it in my book.
I'm sure.
This was a case where a guy, and to explain the circumstances would take too long, but I'll just say this: he was a drunk who ended up living on a campsite with a couple and their young daughter. And well, how we met him was he was dead in a field with a couple gunshot wounds to the back of the head. And that wasn't terribly unusual in the 80s. A lot of people in the drug business were found that way. But he wasn't in the drug business. And he barely had a penny to his name. And so it took a while to figure out what was happening, but we found the people that were living at this campsite nearby where his body was found. And they had a vehicle that looked very similar to his vehicle. And it turned out to be his. And in the long run, we found out that they killed him. But the motive for the killing was this little girl, little 4-year-old, 3-year-old girl that lived out there with her mom and dad. They lived at this campsite where they weren't weekend camping. They were living in this campsite. She had nicknames for all the animals, the raccoons and everything. And there was a pond there with a little baby alligator that swam around. And she named it Tater, Tater the gator, right? And she had a cat named Moonberry, a little kitten she named Moonberry. And this drunken guy, we found out after the wife confessed to us what she did. He gets drunk one night, the kid's acting up as kids will do, and he tells her to shut up, and then he and Ruth start arguing. And he grabs little Moonberry, the cat, and throws it into the pond, upon which time Tater the gator devours the cat. I'm not making this up. Honest to God, this is what happened. And of course the child is just racked with grief now. She's just going crazy. The mother kept her cool, but kind of worked it so that she got him to go with her to collect firewood for the evening's campfire. And when he had his head turned in the car, she plugged him in the back of the head with a .357 Magnum. Wow. And that was the only case that I, or probably any homicide detectives ever had, where the motive was a kitten that had been eaten by an alligator. And that's why it resides for an entire chapter in my book.
Okay, how about one last thing before I get to my last two questions that I always ask. Besides the cases that haunt you,
Mm-hmm.
that you never solved, did you have cases, and maybe one pops into mind, that you solved? Maybe you had a relationship with a family and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to solve this, and you get done, you're like, man, that was it. Did you have something like that?
Yeah, and remember, we worked on squads.
Yeah.
So I wasn't always the lead investigator. On this one, I was not. I worked on the squad where we all worked on it together. Mm-hmm. He was a British businessman who had invested He was a legit guy, very wealthy. Poured a lot of money into a business that he thought was viable here in South Florida. Turned out to be a gigantic fraud. And he started to smell a rat, and he said, "What's going on with the money? What's happening with my return on investment? I'm going to send an auditor down there." And they said, "Well, come on down. We got somebody to buy you out." He had poured like close to $300,000 into this business. So he was happy about being bought out. Well, he didn't get bought out. He got shot in the back of the head. They lured him into an office, killed him, and buried his body out west in the Doral area in a swamp. And that case was worked for the better part of 2.5 years before we solved it. It was a lot of work, a lot of travel, a lot of interviews, and when we finally got all three people involved in that case, that was a sweet win. And you know, his sons, this man's sons were I think 21, 23 years old. They flew down from England for the trial, and we had a couple of beers with them after the conviction, and that was a good feeling. And they toasted us, and you know, I mean, that was a good feeling.
Yeah.
Because you work for the satisfaction of solving the case.
Mm-hmm.
You work because you're challenged by something like that, but you're working for the families.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones who suffered the loss.
Yeah. How many of your cases went unsolved, do you think?
Personal, I don't know. I mean, maybe 20-30%.
Okay.
I think with the team concept, we did well with our closure rate. Now, you might get a case that didn't get closed for 2 years. Or suddenly a lead comes in or something happens and you get a tip from prison or something like that, and boom, you're closing the case all of a sudden. So when you look at an annual homicide rate closing, that it's kind of fluctuates.
Do you know? I mean, is 70% clearance rate? Is that good? Is that average?
I think that's pretty good. I think
Okay.
70% is pretty good.
Okay. How about the advent of DNA? Did that help with your cases at all?
Immensely. I mean, that was a game changer. We were able to go back and take old pre-DNA cases and work them into the CODA system and get some hits. We solved a case like that as well.
Wow.
And so that was a big deal. That was, you know, that late 80s is when that started happening, and late 80s was a lot of stuff happening. That was kind of the renaissance of forensic science and police work, really.
Do you think that, and I don't know how it is here, I hear these stories about with other police departments where they have cases that have DNA and they just don't have the money to get those DNA kits tested. Is that a problem here?
Well, it wasn't back when I was on the job, and I don't know what it's like now.
Okay.
But I know that there was a federal grant that we got that allowed our crime lab to work hundreds of pre-DNA cases. And help get a lot of them solved.
Okay. Looking back on your career when you started, and especially once you became a homicide detective, because, you know, like I said, I've talked to other homicide detectives, and you guys could be gone for 3 or 4 days, never come home. Did law enforcement take a toll on your family?
Oh, sure, it did. It was hard. You know, I had 2 young boys while I was in homicide, and that's why towards the end of my career, I decided I wanted to go into cold case. So cold case had a much saner schedule. We were on day shift. We weren't out handling fresh cases. We were working on older cases. So, you know, previous to that, working the regular homicide squads, you know, you might be working the 7 to 3 shift, and you get a case at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and you know you're going to be working into dinner time, and then things start happening. You know, you get a witness telling you stuff. You all of a sudden you got a search warrant. Then you got a suspect, and you're going after the suspect. Then before you know it, it's 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I'm telling you, it's that you look up and you go, how did it get dark out here? And then, oh my God, it's almost time for roll call for the next day.
Yeah.
And there were many times when we showed up at roll call with the same clothes we had on the day before. So, yes, it's hard on family life. It's probably part of the reason I got a divorce, and many of us did. The divorce rate among homicide cops is pretty high, I think.
Personal question. You don't have to answer this, but in terms of your divorce, when did you get married in your career? Did she?
Too damn early.
Okay.
Yeah.
But were you a patrol?
I was in patrol. I was pretty young. Yeah.
Okay, but you were in patrol so early, so I'm just curious. I mean, you'd think that if you were married to her early on, that she sort of realized what was going on, but maybe it's just.
Well, no, and she did, but I think look, things happen when you have children.
Yeah.
Where, there are stresses.
Yeah.
About there are soccer games and there's campouts and there's all these things that kids get involved with as they get older, and then when they're teenagers,
Mm-hmm.
there's teenager problems. That any parent knows what I'm talking about, right? Whether you're home or not, but when one parent's away, it's difficult.
Yeah.
Right. It's difficult on both parents.
Yeah.
And so that's a real juggling act there. And it does take a toll on people. It takes a toll on both parents. It takes a toll on the kids. Thankfully, my kids don't resent me for it, or at least they say they don't. And yeah.
Okay. Sorry to cut you off there. I just.
Sorry.
I mean, you've seen. So, did this have an effect on your relationships in the family as well? And how did the department deal with this? You've seen hundreds of bodies. Did that affect you mentally?
I think it does. I think anybody that says it doesn't is lying to you.
Okay.
But I think it happens subconsciously, because seeing the bodies, the physical part of seeing bodies is not that bad. You get used to that to a certain extent. You get used to the physical, being in the presence of dead bodies, blood, whatever it is. And again, when it's kids, it's a totally different. That's a different matter altogether. But it's the people, it's the grief and the agony that's left behind in the ones that are living. That's the thing that's hard too. And so it all kind of works on you, right? Not just the bodies, but the emotions of the people that you're dealing with. It's hard. I mean, we told this woman that her infant son had been shot in the head in a shooting, just a random bullet hit this kid. And he was sent to the hospital with the father, was also shot. And we had to tell her that her baby was dead. And then the hospital called and said, oops, we made a mistake, the child's alive. So we had to go untell her. And that was almost as traumatic, because at that point we're like, okay, now we're telling her the baby's alive, but it could end up dying anyway, right? So those kind of things are gut-wrenching. And it does work on you. And I don't think you really fully realize it until you leave the job. And some of those things start to surface sometimes at different times, maybe when you're not expecting it.
Well, that's interesting, because I was talking to another homicide detective that said that exact thing. And it's after you leave, how does two questions.
Yeah.
How does the department, if you leave and you're starting to have some issues, does the department offer you help? And two, getting back to the family, these stresses that are put on you, did you ever feel like you brought any of that home that may affect your family life?
Well, so to address the first part of the question, the department offered you help while we were on the job.
Right.
We had a psychological services counseling that was free to us.
Was it helpful?
It helped me.
Okay.
I availed their services once or twice, and it was helpful. I don't think a lot of guys went because we didn't have much time to go. We were so damn busy. But who knows, because that's all confidential. But and then the second part of your question was that how do you bring the stresses home to the family? Yeah, I think so. It's hard not to. I remember a drowning case where the kid was 1.5 years old and my son was 1.5 years old. And when I went home, I was probably a little more overprotective at times. It works on you. It works on you, and there's no manual on how to do that well. You just have to try and manage it. And so I guess counseling would help.
What was your attitude about this, though? I talked to some officers, some detectives, some law enforcement people that absolutely keep the job separate from home. And then I have others that go, no, I talk to my wife about this all the time, or I talk to my husband about this all the time. I think it's better. What's your philosophy on that?
For me, I mean, I talked to my wife about the job.
Okay.
And the blood and gore stuff, she didn't mind hearing that. She was a nurse. And I talked to her and it was an outlet. It was an outlet. And I wrote also. It was probably an outlet as well. But I talked to her about the job. And I think the danger is talking too much about it. Because looking back, all right, already, let's just go to the movies. Let's just have popcorn and watch the movie.
Yeah.
Let's not talk about the murder you did and how it's similar to the scene in the movie. And they don't, I don't think people would necessarily want to hear that all the time.
Yeah.
And so I think it does change you to a certain extent, because when you do so much of the job for so long, it becomes part of your identity.
Yeah. Okay, so part of your identity. Did you find it hard when you retired then?
I didn't in the long run. I did, and again, there's a scene in my book towards the end. Not to give too much away, but where I was, I'd been retired for less than a year, and I was doing just fine. I was working in real estate. I had a real estate license, and I was at a get together with other realtors, and we were actually at the horse racing track. It was just one of these kind of stress relieving things from the stresses of real estate, mind you. But it's all relative. Everybody's got their stresses.
Right. And
everybody's having a great time drinking margaritas and whatnot. And suddenly there was these TVs there, and a TV comes on. Miami-Dade police officer has been shot and killed. I was instantly transformed back to my old job. I was no longer enjoying that whole thing with the realtors. I suddenly felt very disoriented and very frustrated, because I was supposed to have a clipboard and be out there with those guys working that case, because I'd done that many times. Because that's the only way you feel you can help when a fellow officer's died. The only way you feel you can help is to work on the case. And I felt very frustrated and very alone all of a sudden. Like, holy shit, I thought I was a realtor, but I guess right now I'm not.
So it's interesting you mentioned that. So I'm assuming that you dealt with cases where you dealt with officers that were shot that you personally knew, and maybe you actually had cases where you actually personally knew the victims. How did those cases affect you?
I only had one case where I knew the victim.
Okay.
It was a friend from high school. He'd been killed in a smuggling accident. An airplane crashed. That was a bunch of smugglers out in the Everglades. And that had some challenges to it, but we hadn't seen each other in a couple of years. And it wasn't somebody that, I was always in contact with.
Yeah.
It was a friend.
Yeah.
So that part of it was hard, but it kind of just motivated me to work on that case a little more.
Yeah.
I had another good friend who was a police officer in North Miami who was shot and killed in a bank robbery where he was working off duty as the security at the bank, and was shot and killed. His name was Steve Bauer, and a guy that everybody loved and loved working with. He was just a very energetic guy with a great sense of humor, and was a prankster, and everybody loved him, And I was with the county when that happened. I was working homicide with the county, and I saw that on TV, and that was very hard. It was very hard for a lot of my old North Miami friends too. It was a very tight-knit department and a very family kind of atmosphere. But again, all I wanted to do was work that case, and we did. We worked it very hard for a couple of weeks before we solved it.
Last question for you. Can you look back from your early days before you became a police officer. Can you see a change of how you see people in society from when you first started to now?
Sure. I think I went through a time in police work where, and I think a lot of cops experience this, where humanity is kind of sucks, and we're violent and we're untrustworthy, and you kind of expect people to be like that after a while, and that's unfortunate. And for anybody going into law enforcement, I would suggest have a hobby, have something you do that has nothing to do with law enforcement. Have friends that aren't cops, and hang out with them a lot, and stay in the non-cop world as much as you can when you're off duty. It will help your psyche, I think. And after I retired, and again, I think a lot of cops go through this. That feeling of us and them starts to unravel, and you start to understand things from a different perspective. The guys who crashed the plane and killed my friend, I was angry at them when I was working that case. They were the bad guys, and now I look at them and I go, they were just guys trying to make some money. They were doing something exciting, They never meant to kill him. They were probably devastated. They were all friends. They were all friends in high school. And I don't look at them as harshly anymore. In fact, the Fly Boys is kind of based on that case. And in the book, I try to portray one of the guys, one of the smugglers, from their standpoint. I try to see things from their standpoint in the book. And that's helped me assimilate. That's helped me assimilate into civilian life. I'm just a civilian now. Part of my heart's always in homicide. It always will be. I drive down the street. I see a police officer pulling somebody over. I slow down. I make sure they're okay. What am I going to do? I'm going to get my 66-year-old ass beat up, but I'm going to go out and help him. That part of it stays in your blood.
Yeah. Thanks for the interview. Really appreciate it.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thank you.